Alternative investments, including watches, fine wines, and classic cars, offer unique opportunities outside of traditional stocks and bonds. These tangible assets attract investors seeking diversification, protection against market volatility, and the potential for significant returns. Watches, particularly from brands like Rolex and Patek Philippe, have seen value appreciation driven by rarity and craftsmanship. Fine wines, with a rich history of investment, continue to grow in demand due to their finite production and the increasing global interest in high-quality vintages. Classic cars, especially models from Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Porsche, have become highly sought after, with their value often outpacing traditional investments. Investors are drawn to these assets not only for their potential financial returns, but also for the tangible enjoyment they offer. Collecting these items adds a personal dimension to investment strategies, providing both aesthetic pleasure and portfolio stability. By understanding these alternative investments, investors can better assess their fit within a diversified portfolio. I wanted to start with Jasem, since there was an image of Jasem in there with his watches. You've been collecting Patek Philippe for years. What is it about the craftsmanship and rarity of watches like the Nautilus that makes it so valuable an asset for collectors?
I was interested in watches in general for a long time. Patek Philippe happened to come into my realm of thought many years into my watch collecting journey. I recall it was maybe 2007, 2008, early 2008 when I was, just been shown the road to Patek Philippe. Basically, have gotten a lot of hand holding by a mentor of mine. And so, being a watch lover, full stop, it has nothing to do with investments or assets or all that stuff. I bought Patek because I wanted to own what I perceived, and I continue to think that way, was the most interesting and most coveted and most sought after brand between all the watch brands in its entirety. I think COVID has changed the mindsets of a lot of people, including myself, in terms of how you buy. Pre-COVID, I personally, I'm talking about myself. I used to buy what I loved, and I didn't care about the intrinsic or the carry over value in the future, or whether it it was held as an asset into my portfolio or not. I think during COVID and during the immense growth in price and immense growth in value, even the finest collector, even the billionaires of the collecting watch community, have a little bit been tested with regards to their decision making when they come to buy watches. And so we still buy what we like, but we sure want that what we like holds value. And so the I think the perception have changed, and this is why you have the Nautilus, which is a very basic watch to produce, trade much higher than a 5370, which is a split seconds chronograph in a platinum case and an enamel dial. And so you see this dynamic, or like this huge shift of taste, of decision, and this is like a tectonic shift in the market. I like to make a comparison. I don't know whether this comparison holds any truth or not. I still recall when I was a student in Arizona in ASU, and Cadillac had just released the Escalade. And it was an expensive truck, and it didn't really sell well until the younger crowd or the younger generation picked up on it and making it the hot new car, and it became what it has become ever since. The Nautilus has enjoyed the same ride as an Escalade, and it started off with the 5980 in steel and the blue dial. And when that watch came to the market, all of a sudden, every young person, every entrepreneur, every person with with 30, $45,000 in the bank account, who went for an Hublot or an Audemars or a traditional Rolex, have all of a sudden turned their eyes onto this brand that was, owned and worn and collected by billionaires, kings, queens, etc., etc. And now there's a watch that they can actually wear, and then the ride has moved into where it has come to now.
Thank you for sharing that. Dan, you're a third generation watchmaker. Can you talk a little bit about Patek? And then also, it's like, do you believe that the boom in the luxury watch market, can it continue? Do you think it'll plateau? Do you think there will be corrections? Talk about this market.
Well, I'm going to come from a totally different perspective than the more modern timepieces that he just spoke about. Because the first watch I was ever in was when I was 8 years old, sitting on my grandfather's lap in his watch and jewelry store. He was a watchmaker and was a Patek Calatrava. But these are older watches. And then when I went to school after my music career and headed to Switzerland, and then I was the head of Chopard, 2 different continents, and training other watchmakers, I got to see a lot of timepieces across my bench. Those timepieces are now considered vintage watches. That's where the quiet resurgence has been for a long time, equating it to cars. If you had a 63 split window Corvette back when I grew up, it was cool, but it wasn't vintage yet. If you have one now, it was better than putting your money anywhere in the stock market if it's in good condition. And that's what happened to vintage. That's my expertise. It's complicated timepieces, chronographs, and vintage. That's what this new workshop by the beach here in Delray is fully set up for, just to show and talk about what we're talking about today. Why my new workshop is strictly doing vintages. There's not many of us left at this level that have seen all of these old watches like I have. And the resurgence of this, as from an investing standpoint and a love standpoint, is deep. It's very, very deep. As deep as the younger generation is to the modern watches, knowing all the serial numbers, and does the serial number match the band of the Nautilus? Well, the whole other realm of this is vintage watches, vintage Pateks, vintage Vacheron Constantin, vintage Cartier. The prices have gone through the roof. It's insanity. And they all need repair, and not beyond repair, restoration, because there is no more parts. Just like cars, there is no more parts. There's no parts in Switzerland. Your watches in Switzerland, after you have them for 20 years, the company no longer legally has to sell you or give us as watchmakers parts. So these modern watches, 80 years from now, from a micromechanic standpoint, are not going to fare as well as the vintage watches, because the way they're made internally is as small and as thin as they can make them, which means all the pinions and gears that drive the mechanics are extremely thin, and they cannot be remade the traditional way. Older watches, the wheels are thick, they're overbuilt. They were built at a time where everyone needed a watch, and the watch needed to last for generations and generations and generations in the mechanics. So they can be restored forever. In fact, I have the first Rolex ever made on my bench right here from 1926 that was made in-house. So investing in vintage watches is what I'm seeing is just exploded, and the return on investment is crazy. I mean, I'm sitting here with an old Submariner in front of me that I've been restoring. It's been to numerous watchmakers that could not fix it correctly. And the woman collector, who there's a lot of very big woman collectors out there, who's also, this is part of their portfolio. And she's made a good amount of money on this, and again, better than investing anywhere else.
So it sounds like rarity and age definitely come into play. Brian, I want to ask you about wine. Has there been some softening in the fine wine market? Can you talk about market trends and maybe the potential impact of climate change longer term?
Yeah, collecting wine it's been a little bit complicated, to steal a term from my watchmaking friends here. For a long time, when it came to investing in wine and even just collecting wine, there was a sense that you could get into it for a reasonable amount of money, right? Perfect example. My wife and I bought a house 2.5 years ago. So I moved my entire collection which is a modest collection, a few thousand bottles. But inevitably, I found some things that I had forgotten that I even owned. And one of them to me really sort of encapsulated and embodied what has happened with the world of fine and collectible wine. And that's that this was a bottle of, I believe it was 2004 Dujac, Moët Saint-Denis, just a village wine, which I bought on release for under $100. And I found it, and I just, I went on to Wine Searcher and a couple of the other sites. And this wine now, if you can find it, is clearing $450, $500 for a bottle, from obviously a legendary producer from a wonderful village. But it's very hard to get into that segment of the market when, for a great village wine, you have to drop $400 to $500. So the trends have been interesting. I will say, and you brought up something very important, and that's the impact of climate change. Every vintage of even the best wines in the world, there is inherently going to be what we call vintage variation. And that's a beautiful thing when it comes to wine, right? You don't want every single bottle of, your DRC Romanée Conti to taste the same. You don't want every bottle of your first growth Bordeaux to taste the same. But what's happening now is that the climate is changing in such a way that it's becoming more and more extreme and more unpredictable. So, we could have a so-called great vintage of wine from a particular appellation, insofar as the wine tastes great, it smells wonderful, and it has great aging potential. But we also might have to be dealing with the fact that very little was potentially produced in that vintage because of some of the impacts of climate change. So the roller coaster effect of climate change is really having a very sort of odd impact on the world of collectible wine. A winemaker, as I was researching for my book Crushed, a winemaker in, of all places, Texas Hill Country. She said to me, Brian, it's not so much about global warming as it is global weirding. And I love that idea. It's vaguely terrifying as well. And it's just, you might have what looks like a great fruit set in your vineyard, your village in Champagne. But then all of a sudden in May, this rogue hailstorm comes and knocks out 30 to 40% of your potential crop that year. So you might be able to produce a fabulous vintage champagne, but significantly less of it. So the impact on the collector's market as well as the drinker's market is very real and very complicated.
Nikki, how about cars? I'm assuming that rarity also comes into play. If you're looking at something like a Ferrari or a Porsche as investment vehicles, how important is the element of drivability versus collectible value?
Well, that's a little bit of how all of my projects started. I turned 40 and I had sort of a midlife crisis, and I did what any reasonable man should do if he has a midlife crisis and he can afford it, which is I bought a vintage Ferrari. The car I bought is becoming extremely desirable. That's why I chose to buy that instead of something modern, because I figured maybe in a few years I'll still be able to buy something modern I like a brand new Porsche or something like that. But this car in 10 years is not going to be affordable to me, at least now. I bought a 360 Spider with a manual gearbox. So it's a rare car. There's only 1,641 of them. That's it. And that car, since the previous owner, who I knew, bought it 10 years ago, has doubled in value in 10 years. Doubled in value. And the manual market just keeps going up because there are so few of them. And I don't think it's so dissimilar from watches in a certain sense. Obviously it's different. And just like watches, there are watches that go for multi-million dollar prices and watches that go for in hundreds of thousands and all that. So, and they need repair. Just like Dan said, they need to be repaired. But on average, a good car is also a good investment. Of course, if you have to diversify, if you can't put all your eggs in one basket. If I had $10 million to spend right now, I wouldn't buy 10 different Ferraris. Yes, I would. But no, I would put money in the stock market because on the long term, stock market's obviously going to give a better return in a certain sense. But if you have a few 100,000 to move somewhere and you want a good return, you buy the right car and you maintain it, you are going to make some money off of it. Or at least you won't lose any in certain cases. The car I have, the 360 Spider, averages about 10 a year in increase in value. If you bought a Testarossa, which is now it's older, becoming more desirable after the 30-year mark. Those cars have literally doubled in price in the last 5 years. So it's impressive.
Thank you. Well, I have a feeling that hanging out with you guys are expensive friends to hang out with, for better or worse. It sounds like it's going to be more fun, but it's going to put a dent in my wallet.
Coffins don't have wallets, so we might as well live it up.
What's happening here is, I think my world here in vintage and indie is very similar to what Nick is speaking about with vintage Ferraris. Most of my collectors, they're driving Ferraris. Most of their collections probably, they probably have about $1 million pulled out and into vintage. And they're doing very well with that. So it's a similar situation to what he said. There's just so many of these timepieces out there. And from someone like me, I'm not someone who's buying or guiding someone as a collector into the fashion realm. What does it look like? Or how many supposed limited editions of a modern watch bullshit that they're trying to pump into the public from the big brands. There's obscure old watches where the mechanics have been destroyed, just like his Ferraris. So bad, when the Ferrari was in an accident, the watch has been in an accident. I can fix those watches here with lasers and stuff like that and rebuild them, but they're not worth the money that an original vintage timepiece that the person never polished ever in their life. Because every 5 or 6 years, an old mechanical watch or any mechanical watch, it needs to be serviced, completely ripped apart, like ripping apart the Ferrari's engine, every single piece on my bench, and rebuilt. Now, if you don't do that every 5 years, you did bring that in since the 1940s. Every time you bring it in, that watchmaker is going to give a quick polish to it, and he's going to take off a little bit of the gold, a little bit of the steel, just like a car. If that guy never did that, and he told the watchmaker, don't do that, those are the pieces that are worth a fortune. The pieces that used to be $800 on my bench when I was doing this many years ago and doing restoration of Patek Philippe's for many, many years. Those watches, they weren't too expensive back then. They're just astronomically priced if they haven't been polished. So you have to be real careful if you're diving into the vintage watch world or modern indie watch world. And you need guidance. You definitely need someone like me. Unfortunately, there's not many of us out there.
Maintenance and care definitely matters. We're going to go to segment 2 and talk about valuation.